The door to the throne room shattered inward at exactly midnight, and a girl stumbled through with blood streaming from a gash above her temple, gasping words that would change everything. "Please," she choked out, her eyes wild and unfocused as she staggered forward into the cavernous hall. "They're coming. They'll kill me. I'll do anything, just please." Castellan Draven, vampire king of the Northern Territories, sat motionless upon his obsidian throne, his pale fingers steepled beneath his chin. White hair cascaded past his shoulders like fresh snow against the midnight black of his formal coat, and his crimson eyes tracked every trembling movement the girl made as she collapsed to her knees on the marble floor. The scent of her blood hit the air like a thunderclap, rich and sweet and utterly human. Around the throne room, a dozen of his court vampires tensed. Several hissed softly, their elegant faces shifting into something more predatory. But Draven didn't move, didn't even blink as he studied the terrified creature before him. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair tangled around her shoulders and desperate green eyes that darted toward the broken door behind her. Her clothes were torn, her jeans shredded at the knees, and that cut on her forehead continued to bleed, sending rivulets of crimson down her pale cheek. "My lord," his second-in-command Lysander murmured from his position beside the throne, his own white hair pulled back in a severe queue. "The hunters. They'll breach our territory if we harbor her." "I am aware," Draven said quietly, his voice carrying through the hall despite its softness. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving the girl. "Who are you?" "Beatrice," she gasped, pressing one hand to her bleeding temple. "Beatrice Porter. Please, I know what you are. I know this is crazy, but they're going to kill me, and I didn't know where else to go." "Why?" The single word cut through her panic like a blade. She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. "Because I saw them. The hunters. I saw what they really do. They're not just tracking vampires anymore. They're experimenting, torturing. And when I tried to leave the organization, when I said I wanted no part of it," her voice cracked, "they said I knew too much, that I was a liability. So they're going to make it look like an accident, like a vampire attack." And the sound of boots echoed from the corridor beyond the shattered door. Shouts, the click of weapons being readied. Draven made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Behind the throne!" he commanded, his voice sharp as steel. "Now!" Beatrice scrambled to her feet, nearly falling in her haste as she stumbled around the massive obsidian structure. The throne was built against the wall, elevated on a dais, with just enough space behind it for a person to crouch in the shadows if they pressed themselves flat. She wedged herself into that darkness, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Draven settled back in his throne, adjusting the fall of his coat with deliberate precision. Around him, his court shifted into formation, an elegant, dangerous semicircle of white-haired predators in formal evening wear, their eyes glinting crimson in the low light. "Weapons away," Draven said softly. "We received these guests with civility." The hunters burst into the throne room 30 seconds later. There were 8 of them, all armed with an array of silver-tipped crossbows, UV grenades, and what looked like modified assault rifles loaded with wooden stakes. They wore tactical gear, marked with the sigil of the Hunters Guild, a crossed stake and torch, and their leader was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and cold blue eyes. He stopped short when he saw Draven and his court, clearly not expecting to find the Vampire King himself in residence. The abandoned estate above them, a crumbling Gothic mansion on the outskirts of the city, was supposed to be empty, a known entrance to the vampire court below, but rarely occupied by anyone of importance. "Lord Draven," the hunter said, and Beatrice could hear the disdain in his voice even from her hiding place. "We're tracking a fugitive, human female, early 20s, auburn hair. She came this way. We have every reason to believe she entered this building." "This is sovereign vampire territory," Draven replied, his tone pleasant and utterly cold. "You have no jurisdiction here, Hunter Marshal." So the Vampire King knew him. Beatrice pressed her hand harder against her temple, trying to stem the bleeding as she listened to the exchange. Marshall's jaw tightened. "The treaty allows pursuit of human criminals across territorial lines. She's stolen classified guild information. This isn't about vampires. It's about a human traitor." "How fascinating," Draven murmured. "And yet I see no human fugitive here, Only uninvited guests who have damaged my door." He gestured languidly toward the splintered entrance. "That was 17th century oak, you know, irreplaceable." "We know she came this way," another hunter snapped, a younger man with a scar across his cheek. "The blood trail leads straight to this room." Beatrice glanced down and felt her stomach drop. They were right. She'd left drops of blood across the marble floor, a crimson trail that led directly to the throne, directly to where she was hiding. But Draven didn't even glance at the blood. He simply stared at Marshall with those ancient, knowing eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You accuse me of lying?" His voice was still pleasant, still utterly terrifying. Marshall hesitated. Around the throne room, Draven's court had gone very, very still in the way that apex predators do before they strike. Lysander's hand had drifted to the ceremonial sword at his hip, ceremonial in name only, Beatrice suspected. "I accuse you of nothing, my lord," Marshall said finally, the words clearly bitter on his tongue. "But if you are harboring a human criminal—" "Then what?" Draven interrupted softly. "You'll declare it an act of war. You'll rally the other guilds. You'll break a treaty that has kept the peace for 200 years. He rose from his throne in a single fluid motion, descending the dais with the grace of flowing water. "Choose your next words very carefully, Hunter Marshall. I am in a generous mood tonight, which is why you still draw breath despite breaking into my home. But generosity has limits." The hunters shifted nervously. They were armed, yes, but they were also outnumbered by creatures that could move faster than human eyes could track, that could tear through flesh like paper. The treaty existed because both sides had agreed that war was more costly than coexistence, but treaties were fragile things. Marshall's hand twitched toward his weapon, then fell away. "We'll be posting guards at the perimeter," he said flatly. "If she leaves this building, she's ours." "How very industrious of you," Draven replied. "Do try not to disturb the neighbors. Some of us value our privacy." It was a dismissal, clear and absolute. Marshall stared at him for a long moment, then jerked his head toward his team. They filed out of the throne room, their weapons still drawn, their eyes scanning the shadows. But they left. The moment the last hunter disappeared down the corridor, Draven's pleasant expression vanished. He turned and moved back to the throne with inhuman speed, gesturing sharply. "Seal the perimeter. I want guards on every entrance, and someone repair that door before dawn." His court scattered to obey, moving with the eerie silence of their kind. Only Lysander remained, his pale face thoughtful as he watched Draven circle around behind the throne. Beatrice was still pressed against the wall, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear and relief. When Draven appeared in front of her, those crimson eyes fixing on her face, she flinched. "Come out," he said, not unkindly. She edged out from behind the throne, her legs unsteady beneath her. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she was acutely aware that she'd just thrown herself on the mercy of creatures that drank human blood to survive. That considered her species prey. Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse. "Thank you. I don't know why you helped me, but—" "You're bleeding on my floor," Draven interrupted, his eyes fixed on the wound at her temple with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Lysander, fetch the medical kit, the human one." Lysander raised one elegant eyebrow. "My lord, surely." "Now." The other vampire inclined his head and vanished through a side door, moving with that unnatural speed. Beatrice swayed slightly, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once, and suddenly Draven's hand was on her elbow, steadying her. His touch was cold, not ice cold, but cool enough to be startling, like marble that had been kept in shadow. She looked up at him. He was tall, easily 6'2", with features that seemed carved from stone, and found him studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why did you help me?" she asked again, more softly this time. Something flickered in those crimson eyes. "I dislike Marshall," he said after a moment. "He killed someone dear to me 70 years ago, and the treaty prevents me from taking appropriate revenge. Denying him his quarry tonight was satisfying." It wasn't the whole truth. Beatrice could sense that, could see it in the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his eyes slid away from hers. But before she could press, Lysander returned with a leather case that looked distinctly out of place in the Gothic grandeur of the throne room. "Sit!" Draven commanded, gesturing to the steps of the dais. Beatrice sat, too exhausted to argue. She watched as the Vampire King knelt in front of her and opened the medical kit with practiced efficiency. His movements were precise, clinical, as he extracted antiseptic and gauze. "You keep human medical supplies?" she asked faintly. "We employ human staff," Lysander said from somewhere behind her. "For daylight business, correspondence, maintenance. Occasionally they injure themselves. It's more efficient to treat them here than to explain emergency room visits." Draven dabbed antiseptic on a cotton pad and reached for Beatrice's face. She jerked back instinctively, and he paused. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "But this needs to be cleaned, and the scent of your blood is distracting my court. The sooner it's bandaged, the better for everyone." There was something almost wry in his tone. Beatrice forced herself to hold still as he cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness, his cool fingers steady against her skin. This close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the poreless white skin, the hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the eyes that glowed with their own internal fire. "What did you see?" he asked as he worked, his voice low enough that she wasn't sure Lysander could hear. "What did the hunters do that made you run?" Beatrice's throat tightened. "They have a facility. Underground, beneath the guild headquarters. I was doing research. I'm an archivist. I catalog artifacts and records, and I found a file that wasn't supposed to exist. It had logs, dates, names. Vampires they'd captured instead of killed. They've been keeping them alive, studying them, trying to figure out how to synthesize vampire abilities for human use." She shuddered. "The things they described doing, the experiments, it was torture. And when I confronted my supervisor, when I said I was going to the authorities, he just looked at me and said, 'You're not leaving this building alive.'" Draven's hands had gone very still against her face. "Names," he said softly. "Do you remember any of the names in that file?" "I took pictures," Beatrice whispered. "On my phone, before they chased me. I don't know if they're still there, if the phone survived." She patted her pockets frantically and felt the familiar shape of her cell. She pulled it out with shaking hands, thumbing it open. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed with damage, but it still worked. She pulled up her photo gallery and handed the phone to Draven, watching as his expression went from controlled neutrality to something much darker. "Lysander," he said, his voice soft and deadly. "Come here." The other vampire appeared at his shoulder, and together they scrolled through the images. Beatrice had taken dozens of photos in the few minutes she'd had, page after page of logs, names, dates, descriptions of procedures that made her feel sick just remembering them. "Seraphine," Lysander breathed, stopping on one entry. "She disappeared 6 months ago. We thought the hunters had killed her. And Casimir, and Victor, and—" Draven's jaw clenched so hard Beatrice heard something crack. "Morgana." The name seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Lysander closed his eyes briefly, grief flickering across his elegant features. "Your sister," he murmured. "They've had her for 3 years, Draven said, his voice utterly empty now. 3 years of this." He gestured at the phone, at the clinical descriptions of torture disguised as science. When he looked up at Beatrice, there was something ancient and furious in his gaze, something that made her remember exactly what he was. "You were right to run. Marshall would have killed you, and he would have enjoyed it." He handed the phone back to her, then rose in a single fluid motion, turning away. His hands were clenched at his sides, and the temperature in the room had dropped another 10 degrees. Frost was literally forming on the surface of the obsidian throne. "My lord," Lysander said carefully, "we need to verify." "I know." Draven's voice was clipped. "Assemble the council. I want every lord and lady of the court here within the hour, and send word to the other territories they need to know what's happening." He turned back to Beatrice, and his expression softened slightly, though the fury still simmered beneath the surface. "You're going to need to stay here. The hunters will be watching every exit, and they won't hesitate to kill you the moment you step outside." "I understand," Beatrice said quietly. She should have been terrified. She was on some level, but she was also exhausted, and there was something strangely reassuring about the cold competence with which Draven was handling this. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring this to your door. I didn't know where else to go." "You chose correctly," he said, and there was an odd note in his voice. "The hunters broke the treaty the moment they started taking prisoners for experimentation. You've given us proof of that. This isn't an inconvenience, Miss Porter. This is an act of war they've been waging in secret, and you've just handed us the evidence we need to end it. He studied her for a moment longer, then glanced at Lysander. Show her to one of the guest suites. Get her food, clean clothes, whatever she needs. Post a guard for her protection, not to keep her prisoner, he added, looking back at Beatrice. You're a guest here, and you're under my personal protection. That means you're safe. Do you understand? Beatrice nodded slowly. Why? She asked again, because she still didn't fully understand. Why protect me? You don't know me. I'm nobody. Draven's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. You risked everything to bring this to light, he said quietly. You could have destroyed those photos, pretended you never saw them, kept your head down and your life intact. But you didn't. That kind of courage is rare, worth protecting. He paused. And you came to me for shelter. In 200 years, no human has ever done that. You trusted a vampire king over your own kind. I find that intriguing. Before she could respond, he turned and strode from the throne room, his coat billowing behind him like dark wings. The fury was still there, simmering beneath his control, and she had the distinct sense that Hunter Marshall and his guild were about to face something they'd never anticipated. Lysander offered her his arm with old-world courtesy. Come, Miss Porter, you look dead on your feet, no pun intended. Let's get you somewhere you can rest. Beatrice let him lead her through the winding corridors of what she was rapidly realizing was a massive underground complex. The walls were stone, the ceilings vaulted and Gothic, with electric sconces designed to mimic candlelight. Portraits lined the hallways, pale figures in period dress, their eyes following her as she passed. How long has this place been here? She asked, partly to distract herself from the surrealness of the situation. The foundations date back to the 1600s, Lysander replied. It was a monastery originally, then a series of catacombs. Lord Draven claimed it as his seat 2 centuries ago, when the treaty was first signed. It's been expanded significantly since then. There are over 100 rooms now, on 4 different levels. He stopped in front of an ornate wooden door and pushed it open, revealing a bedroom that looked like something out of a Gothic fantasy. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in midnight blue velvet, and there was a fireplace, a sitting area, even a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. The bathroom is through there, Lysander said, pointing to another door. I'll have someone bring you clothes and food. Is there anything else you need immediately? Beatrice shook her head, too overwhelmed to think clearly. This is too much. I don't need... Lord Draven's instructions were clear, Lysander interrupted gently. You're to be treated as an honored guest. This is one of the simpler suites, actually. He studied her for a moment, his crimson eyes thoughtful. You should know, what you've done tonight bringing us this information, it matters. Morgana was Draven's younger sister. She was turned only 50 years ago, still young by our standards. He's been searching for her since she disappeared, and the not knowing has been eating at him. His expression softened slightly. You've given him answers, terrible answers, but answers nonetheless. Don't underestimate the value of that. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Beatrice stood in the center of the lavish room for a long moment, then walked slowly to the bed and sat down. Her hands were shaking again. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving her feeling hollow and strange. She'd just upended her entire life. She'd betrayed the organization she'd worked for since college, thrown herself on the mercy of vampires, and started what Draven had called an act of war. And yet, she didn't regret it. Those logs, those descriptions of what they'd done to sentient beings, she couldn't have lived with herself if she'd stayed silent. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Lysander. Instead, a young woman entered, human from the warmth of her skin and the lack of that eerie vampire grace. She was carrying a tray of food and had several garments draped over one arm. Miss Porter, I'm Elena. I work here administrative assistant, mostly. Lord Lysander asked me to bring you these. She set the tray on a side table and laid out the clothes on the bed. I guessed at your size, but there's a variety here. And the food is just basic soup, bread, fruit. I wasn't sure what you'd want after everything. Thank you. Beatrice said, surprised by the kindness. You work here? For vampires? Elena smiled slightly. For almost 5 years now. I know it seems strange, but they're actually excellent employers. Fair pay, good benefits, and they're very serious about the treaty. No one's ever tried to feed on me or any of the other human staff. It's strictly forbidden. She hesitated. I heard what you did, what you found. Just thank you. I know it doesn't mean much coming from a stranger, but thank you for having the guts to do the right thing. She left before Beatrice could respond, and Beatrice found herself alone again with her thoughts and a tray of surprisingly normal food. She ate mechanically, then showered in the elaborate bathroom, all black marble and silver fixtures, and changed into the clothes Elena had brought. Soft cotton pants and a loose sweater, comfortable and warm. She was sitting by the fireplace trying to process everything when another knock sounded. This time it was Draven. He'd changed clothes. She noticed the formal coat replaced by a simpler black shirt and dark trousers, and his white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp lines of his features. He looked tired, if vampires could be tired, and there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. May I come in? He asked, and the courtesy surprised her. Of course. It's your home. He entered and closed the door behind him, then stood there for a moment as if unsure what to say. Finally, he moved to the chair across from hers and sat, his movements as graceful as ever. The council is convening, he said quietly. Representatives from the other territories are arriving as we speak. By dawn, we'll have a unified response to this. He paused. I wanted to thank you, personally. What you did tonight, what you risked, it matters more than you know. Lysander said Morgana was your sister, Beatrice said softly. Pain flickered across Draven's face, stark and raw. She is my sister. And if there's even a chance she's still alive, still in that facility, I will burn the Hunters Guild to the ground to get her back. The words were spoken with absolute conviction, and Beatrice believed him utterly. This was what vampires were. She realized creatures of intense passion and loyalty, capable of both breathtaking kindness and terrible violence. The treaty kept them in check, gave them rules to follow, but beneath that civilized veneer, they were still apex predators. Will there be war? She asked. I don't know, Draven admitted. It depends on how the other territories react, and on whether the guild leadership knows about these experiments. If Marshall was acting alone or with a small faction, we might be able to contain this. But if it's systemic, he shook his head, then yes, there will be war, and it will be ugly. Silence stretched between them. Beatrice stared into the fire, watching the flames dance, and tried to imagine what that would look like. Vampires against hunters, centuries of uneasy peace shattered. How many people would die? I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't think when I ran here. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. You did the right thing, Draven interrupted firmly. Whatever happens now, it was already happening. The guild was already torturing prisoners, already violating the treaty. You didn't cause this, Beatrice. You exposed it. There's a difference. He rose and moved to the fireplace, staring down into the flames. The firelight played across his pale features, painting him in shades of gold and shadow, and Beatrice found herself studying him with an intensity that surprised her. He was beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often were, all sharp edges and controlled power. You should rest, he said without looking at her. The guards will be posted outside your door within the hour. No one will harm you here, I give you my word. What about you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. When do you rest? He turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. Concerned for my well-being, Miss Porter. You looked exhausted, she said honestly, and you're about to make decisions that could start a war. That seems like something you should do with a clear head. Something shifted in his expression, softening it. I don't sleep the way humans do, he said quietly. A few hours before dawn, perhaps, but it's not the same. And my mind won't quiet tonight, not with everything that's happening. He moved toward the door, then paused. But I appreciate the concern. It's been a long time since anyone worried whether I was resting enough. He left before she could respond, and Beatrice was alone again in the lavish room. She climbed into the enormous bed, expecting to lie awake for hours, but exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately. She dreamed of blood and hunters and a pale hand pulling her into safety. When Beatrice woke, she had no idea what time it was. There were no windows in the room, they were underground, she reminded herself, and no clock that she could see. She lay in the darkness for a moment, disoriented, before remembering where she was. The Vampire King's court, hidden beneath a Gothic mansion, protected by creatures that drank blood. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt oddly safe. There was a soft knock at the door, and Elena's voice called out, "Miss Porter, are you awake? Lord Draven asked me to check on you." Beatrice climbed out of bed and opened the door. Elna stood there with another tray of food coffee this time, and what looked like a full breakfast. "It's almost noon," Elena said, slipping into the room. "You slept for about 10 hours. Lord Draven said to let you rest as long as you needed, but I thought you might be hungry when you woke." "Thank you," Beatrice said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "What's happening with the council?" Elena's expression grew serious. "They met through the night. All the territorial lords are here now. It's actually historic. They haven't all gathered in one place in decades, and they've sent envoys to the Hunters Guild leadership, demanding an explanation and access to the facility mentioned in your photos. And the Guild is denying everything, claiming the documents are forgeries, that you're a disgruntled employee trying to start trouble." Elena's mouth tightened. "But Lord Draven has the other lords convinced. They're preparing for the worst." Beatrice's stomach sank. War. Maybe. Or maybe just a very targeted strike. It's hard to say, vampire politics are complicated. Elena hesitated. "Lord Draven asked if you'd join him in his study when you're ready. He has questions about the facility's location, security, things like that. Only if you're feeling up to it." Beatrice nodded slowly. "Give me 20 minutes to get ready." She dressed carefully in the clothes Elena had brought, dark jeans and a deep green sweater that brought out her eyes, and tried to tame her auburn hair into something presentable. The cut on her temple was already healing, she noticed, the edges knitting together cleanly. She covered it with her hair and took a deep breath. Elena led her through the warren of corridors to what was apparently Draven's private study. It was a smaller room than the throne room, but no less impressive, lined with bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. A massive desk dominated one end, covered in maps and documents, and Draven stood behind it, with several other vampires clustered around. They all looked up when Beatrice entered. She recognized Lysander immediately, but the others were strangers, 3 men and 2 women, all with that same unearthly beauty and white hair, though their features varied. One of the women looked vaguely Asian, another had features that suggested African ancestry. The men ranged from delicate and almost feminine to broad-shouldered and imposing. "Miss Porter," Draven said, and there was warmth in his voice that surprised her. "Thank you for joining us. May I introduce the territorial lords? Lady Seraphina of the Eastern Territories, Lord Constantine of the West, Lady Amara of the South, Lord Nikolai of the Central Territories, and Lord Tiberius, who oversees the coastal regions." They each inclined their heads to her with varying degrees of curiosity. Lady Seraphina's crimson eyes were particularly sharp, assessing. "So this is the human who has thrown our world into chaos," she murmured, though there was no malice in her tone. "Brave or foolish, I wonder." "Both, perhaps," Beatrice said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just couldn't stay silent about what I saw." "Conscience," Lord Nikolai said, sounding almost surprised. "How refreshing. Most humans who work for the Guild have thoroughly suppressed that particular inconvenience." "Enough," Draven said, though not harshly. "Beatrice, we need your help. The photos you provided show the interior of the facility, but we need to know where it's located. You mentioned it was beneath the Guild headquarters?" Beatrice nodded and moved closer to the desk, studying the maps spread across it. They showed the city in intricate detail, including infrastructure most people didn't know existed. "Here," she said, pointing to a building in the old district. "The headquarters is this Gothic revival structure. It used to be a courthouse in the 1800s. The facility is 3 levels below the basement, accessible only by a private elevator that requires both a keycard and biometric scan." "Security?" Lord Constantine asked, his accent vaguely Russian. "Heavy. Armed guards on every level, cameras everywhere, reinforced doors, and they'll have increased it after I ran. They know I have the information. They'll be expecting retaliation." Beatrice bit her lip. "There's more. The facility has a fail-safe. If there's any attempt to breach it, the whole level floods with UV light. It's designed to kill any vampire instantly." The lords exchanged grim looks. Lady Amara leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "How do you know this?" "I've worked for the guild for 4 years," Beatrice said quietly. "I had high-level clearance because I handled sensitive historical documents. I was supposed to be trustworthy." The word tasted bitter. "I saw the schematics once, in a file I was cataloging. At the time I thought it was just a security measure against vampire attack. Now I realize it was to protect what they were doing down there." Draven had gone very still, his hands flat on the desk. Then a direct assault would be suicide. "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "I'm sorry. I know you want to get your sister back, get all of them back, but—" "There has to be a way," Lysander interrupted, his voice tight. "We can't just leave them there." "We won't," Draven said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. "But we need to be smart about this. Rushing in will only get people killed." He looked at Beatrice, and his expression softened. "You must be hungry. This can wait." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "I want to help. If there's anything I can do." "You've already done more than enough," Lady Seraphina said, studying her with those sharp eyes. "But I confess, I'm curious. Why did you come to us? Surely there were human authorities you could have approached, media, government agencies." Beatrice met her gaze steadily. "Because by the time I could convince any of them to investigate, everyone in that facility would be dead. The guild would destroy the evidence and disappear the prisoners the moment they caught wind of an official inquiry. But you," she gestured at the assembled vampires, "you could act immediately, and you'd actually care about saving them, not just making headlines." "She's not wrong," Lord Tiberius said, sounding almost approving. "Human authorities are notoriously slow to act, especially where vampires are concerned. They'd probably consider it a guild internal matter." "The question is what we do now," Lord Nikolai said. "The guild is denying everything, and we have no legal standing to demand access to the facility. If we attack, we break the treaty ourselves and give them justification for open war." "Unless we can prove they broke it first," Draven said quietly. "Beatrice's photos are evidence, but the guild will claim they're fabricated. We need something undeniable. A witness, perhaps, or physical proof." "I'll testify," Beatrice said immediately, "in front of anyone, any authority. I'll swear to what I saw." "They'll discredit you," Lady Amara said, not unkindly. "You're a fugitive from the guild with every reason to lie. Your testimony alone won't be enough." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the impossible situation. The vampires needed proof to justify action, but the only proof was locked inside a facility designed to kill them if they tried to breach it. "What if we don't breach it?" Beatrice said slowly, an idea forming. "What if I go back?" Every head in the room swiveled toward her. Draven's expression went from thoughtful to thunderous in an instant. "Absolutely not," he said flatly. "Think about it," she pressed, speaking quickly before he could shut her down completely. "They want me dead, yes, but they also want the information I took. What if I approach them, offer to trade? The photos for my life, maybe even my old job back. They might believe I just panicked, that I'm having second thoughts." "They'll kill you the moment you walk through the door," Lysander said bluntly. "Maybe," Beatrice admitted, "but maybe not. I have something they want, and I could make it clear the photos are stored somewhere safe, that they'll be released if anything happens to me. At the very least, they'd have to keep me alive long enough to recover the data." "And then?" Draven's voice was dangerously quiet. "What's your plan once you're inside a building full of people who want you dead?" "I document everything I can. I find proof they can't deny: videos, witnesses, physical evidence. And I find a way to get it out to you." She turned to face him fully, lifting her chin. "You said it yourself, this is already happening. The prisoners are already being tortured. Every day we spend trying to find another way is another day they suffer. I can end this. I can get you what you need." "No," Draven said, and there was an edge to his voice now. Something ancient and commanding. "I won't send a human to die for us. Find another way." "There is no other way." Beatrice's frustration boiled over. "You know there isn't. This is the only option that doesn't end in open war or leaving those people to suffer indefinitely. I'm willing to take the risk." "I'm not willing to allow it," Draven interrupted, his eyes blazing. "You put yourself under my protection when you came here. That means your safety is my responsibility, and I don't send people I've sworn to protect into death traps." "It's not your decision to make," Beatrice shot back. "I'm not one of your subjects. I'm a free human being, and if I want to risk my life to fix the mess I helped uncover—" "You helped uncover nothing," Draven said, his voice rising. "The Guild created this situation. Marshall and his people are the ones who violated the treaty, who tortured prisoners. Their crimes are not your responsibility." "But I can stop them." "Not if you're dead." The words echoed in the sudden silence. Draven was breathing hard, or going through the motions of breathing, Beatrice corrected herself, since vampires didn't actually need to breathe, and his hands were clenched on the desk hard enough that the wood was splintering under his grip. The other lords were watching with fascination. Lady Seraphina looked actively amused, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well," she said lightly, "this is interesting." Draven turned his glare on her, and she raised her hands in mock surrender. "I'm merely observing that you seem unusually invested in this particular human's well-being, Draven. One might almost think you've developed a certain fondness." "One would be overstepping," Draven said coldly. "Perhaps," Lady Seraphina's smile widened, "or perhaps one would be observant." She turned to Beatrice, her expression growing more serious. "Your courage is admirable, Miss Porter, but Lord Draven is correct. The risk is too great, and your death would serve no purpose. The Guild would simply claim you were a traitor who met an unfortunate end, and we'd be no closer to freeing the prisoners." "Then what do we do?" Beatrice asked, feeling helpless. "Just give up?" "We think," Lord Constantine said. "We plan. We find a weakness in their security that doesn't require a human sacrifice." He glanced at Draven. "Though I would suggest that Miss Porter be included in those plans. She knows more about the Guild's operations than anyone else we have access to. Her knowledge is valuable." Draven's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Agreed. But the plan does not involve her walking back into the Guild's hands. That's non-negotiable." The meeting continued for another hour, with the lords debating various approaches and Beatrice providing what information she could about Guild security protocols, staffing patterns, and potential vulnerabilities. By the time they finally broke, she was exhausted from the intensity of their focus and the weight of what they were planning. Draven dismissed the other lords with quiet courtesy, and soon it was just him and Beatrice in the study, surrounded by maps and documents and the lingering tension from their argument. "I apologize," he said quietly, not looking at her, "for raising my voice. It was inappropriate." "You're scared," Beatrice said, surprised by her own insight. "For your sister, for the others. You want to save them, but you're terrified of making the wrong move." His eyes snapped to hers, and she saw the truth there, raw and painful. "I've already lost her once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I spent 3 years not knowing if she was alive or dead, and it nearly destroyed me. Now I know she's alive, that she's being held and tortured, and I still can't reach her. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "No," Beatrice admitted, "but I can imagine, and I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to minimize your fear. I want to help. I need to help because if I don't, if I just hide here while people suffer because of information I could have found sooner, acted on faster, I won't be able to live with myself." Draven moved around the desk, closing the distance between them with that inhuman grace. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his features, the weight of responsibility he carried. He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His touch was cool and gentle, and Beatrice's breath caught. "You can't save everyone," he said softly. "I learned that lesson centuries ago, and it's bitter every time. But you can do your best with the resources you have and trust that it's enough, that you're enough." "Is that what you do?" she asked. "It's what I try to do." His hand fell away and he stepped back, the distance between them opening again like a chasm. "Get some rest. We'll reconvene this evening, see if anyone has new ideas." He paused at the door. "And Beatrice, thank you for trusting me, for bringing this to light. Whatever happens next, you did the right thing." He left before she could respond, and Beatrice stood alone in the study, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Over the next 3 days, Beatrice became a fixture in the vampire court's war room, because that's what it had become, she realized. The study had been transformed into a command center with detailed schematics of the guild headquarters, guard rotation schedules, and lists of known personnel. Beatrice provided every scrap of information she could remember, no matter how small, and watched as the vampire lords pieced together a picture of the facility's defenses. She also got to know the vampires themselves, which was surreal in ways she hadn't anticipated. They were nothing like the monsters she'd been raised to fear. Yes, they were dangerous. She never forgot that, but they were also people. Lysander had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh despite the seriousness of the situation. Lady Seraphina turned out to be a brilliant strategist with a love of ancient poetry. Lord Constantine told stories about the Napoleonic Wars as if he'd been there, which, she realized with a start, he had. And then there was Draven. He was always there, a constant presence in the planning sessions, his sharp mind cutting through problems with ruthless efficiency. But he was also careful around her, maintaining a polite distance that felt deliberate. No more casual touches, no more moments of vulnerability like that day in the study. It drove her crazy, in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. On the 4th day, Elena knocked on her door just after sunset. Beatrice had adjusted her schedule to match the vampire's nocturnal rhythm with a message. "Lord Draven requests your presence in the throne room," she said, her eyes bright with barely suppressed excitement. "I think they've figured something out." Beatrice followed her through the corridors, her heart pounding. The throne room was full when she arrived, packed with not just the territorial lords but dozens of other vampires she didn't recognize. They parted to let her through, and she found Draven standing before his throne, with Lysander at his side. "Beatrice," he said, and his voice carried through the hall. "We have a plan. It's risky and it requires precision, but we believe it can work." He gestured to the map spread across a table nearby. "The facility's UV fail-safe is its greatest defense, but it's also a vulnerability. It requires massive amounts of power to activate more than the building's normal electrical system can provide. There's a dedicated generator in the sub-basement with redundant backups. If we take out the generator," Lysander continued, "we have approximately 90 seconds before the backup systems engage. That's our window." 90 seconds to breach a reinforced facility, locate the prisoners, and extract them? Beatrice said, her mind racing. "That's impossible." "For humans, yes," Lady Amara said, stepping forward, "but we're considerably faster. A strike team of 20 vampires moving at full speed could cover that distance and accomplish the objective within the time frame." "But how do you take out the generator without alerting them?" Beatrice asked. "The moment the power goes down, they'll lock down the building." "That's where you come in," Draven said quietly, and her stomach dropped. "Not as bait," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "As a distraction. We need the guild's attention focused somewhere else while the strike team moves into position, and we need someone who can access the building without raising immediate alarms." "I'm wanted by the guild," Beatrice pointed out, "the moment I show up." "At the front door, yes," Lord Tiberius interrupted. "But there are other entrances, service entrances, delivery docks, maintenance access, places where a former employee with the right credentials might slip in unnoticed." Beatrice's mind was spinning. "You want me to sabotage the generator?" "No," Draven said firmly. "Too dangerous. We have someone else who can handle that, a human contractor who works with several vampire territories and owes us a significant favor. But we need you to get him inside, to vouch for him if anyone questions his presence. And then we need you to create a diversion that draws security away from the facility entrance." "What kind of diversion?" "A fire alarm on the upper floors. Some kind of emergency that requires evacuation protocols. Something that will occupy the guild's security forces long enough for us to strike." He moved closer, his crimson eyes intense. "I won't lie to you, Beatrice. This is still dangerous. If they catch you, they'll kill you. But you'll have support vampires positioned throughout the building, ready to extract you the moment the diversion is in place. You won't be alone." Beatrice took a deep breath, weighing the risks. It was still a suicide mission, just a slightly less suicidal one than her original plan. But it was also a real chance to free the prisoners, to end this nightmare. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. The guild has a board meeting scheduled. Most of their leadership will be in the building, which means increased security but also more chaos if something goes wrong. More people to evacuate, more confusion to hide in. Draven paused. If you agree to this, we start preparations immediately. But Beatrice, I need you to be sure. I need you to understand that I can't guarantee your safety, no matter how carefully we plan. I understand, she said quietly. And I'm sure. Let's do this. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Beatrice was fitted with a tiny earpiece that would let her communicate with the strike team, given detailed maps of the building's layout, and walked through the plan so many times she could have recited it in her sleep. The human contractor, a middle-aged man named Marcus, who specialized in electrical systems, arrived and was briefed separately, though Beatrice met with him long enough to coordinate their entry. Through it all, Draven was a constant presence, checking details, adjusting plans, and watching Beatrice with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He didn't try to talk her out of it again, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. The night of the operation, he found her in her room as she was preparing to leave. She was dressed in dark, nondescript clothing jeans, a black jacket, her hair pulled back, and she was checking her equipment one final time when he knocked. "Come in," she called, expecting Lysander or Elena. Instead, Draven entered and closed the door behind him. He'd armed himself. She noticed a sword at his hip, despite the formal black coat he wore. He looked like something out of a Gothic painting, beautiful and deadly and utterly inhuman. "I wanted to speak with you," he said quietly. "Before you go." "Last-minute tactical adjustments?" she asked, trying for levity. "No. The plan is sound." He moved closer, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "I wanted to say that if something goes wrong, if the guild captures you, the strike team has orders to extract you, no matter the cost to the mission. Your life takes priority over freeing the prisoners." Beatrice stared at him. "You can't mean that. Your sister is in there. All those people." "I mean it absolutely," he interrupted, his voice soft but inflexible. "Morgana wouldn't want me to trade your life for hers. None of them would. And He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I couldn't live with myself if I sent you to your death. The mission matters, but you matter more." Her heart was hammering now, her breath coming short. "Why?" she whispered. "I'm nobody to you. We met 4 days ago." "You're not nobody," Draven said, and he reached up to cup her face in his cool hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "You're the bravest person I've met in 200 years. You're brilliant and stubborn, and you have this infuriating habit of trying to sacrifice yourself for people you don't even know. And somewhere in the last 4 days, you've become important to me in ways I don't entirely understand." Beatrice's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain some kind of professional distance, but instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes locked on his. "I'm coming back," she said quietly. "I'm going to pull this off, free your sister, and come back safely. You're not getting rid of me that easily." Something shifted in his expression, relief and fear, and something that might have been hope. "Promise me," he said. "Promise me you'll run if things go wrong, that you won't try to be a hero." "I promise," she lied, because they both knew she'd do whatever it took to complete the mission. He knew it too. She could see it in his eyes. But he nodded anyway, and then so slowly she could have stopped him if she wanted. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was chaste, almost reverent, and it made something in her chest ache. "Come back to me," he whispered against her skin. Then he stepped back, his hands falling away, and the moment shattered. "The strike team is assembled. It's time." The insertion went smoothly, almost suspiciously so. Beatrice and Marcus approached the guild headquarters from the service entrance, using her old employee credentials to access the loading dock. The security guard on duty, someone she recognized from her time working there, barely glanced at them before waving them through. "Delivery?" he asked, bored. "Electrical inspection," Marcus said, holding up his toolkit. "Scheduled maintenance on the backup systems." The guard checked his computer, found the work order that the vampires had somehow inserted into the system, and nodded. "Sign in. You know the drill, Porter." Beatrice signed the log with shaking hands, acutely aware of the fact that she was now inside the building where dozens of people wanted her dead. But her disguise held baseball cap pulled low, shapeless jacket hiding her frame, and they moved deeper into the building without incident. "Phase 1 complete," she murmured into her earpiece. "We're in." "Copy that," came Lysander's voice, crisp and professional. "Strike team is in position at the north entrance. Proceed to the generator room." Marcus led the way, navigating the basement corridors with the confidence of someone who'd worked in similar buildings dozens of times. They passed maintenance workers and administrative staff, all too busy with their own tasks to pay attention to two contractors heading for the electrical systems. The generator room was in the deepest part of the basement, behind a locked door that Marcus bypassed in under 30 seconds. Inside, the massive generators humbled and thrummed, providing power to the entire building. "This is it," Marcus muttered, studying the setup. "Give me 5 minutes to set the charges." Beatrice kept watch at the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. Through her earpiece, she could hear the strike team's quiet communications as they prepared to move. "Charges set," Marcus said finally. "Remote detonator armed. When you're ready, just give the word." "Copy," Lysander's voice said. "Beatrice, proceed to the upper floors. Initiate the diversion on my mark." Beatrice and Marcus split up. He headed back toward the loading dock, his part in the operation complete, while she made her way to the stairwell. Her employee credentials got her through the security doors, and she climbed quickly to the 5th floor, far enough from the facility to draw attention away, but not so far that she couldn't escape if needed. The 5th floor housed administrative offices and conference rooms. It was after hours, but the board meeting meant there were still plenty of people in the building. Beatrice made her way to the supply closet she'd identified during the planning sessions, pulled out the materials she'd hidden in her jacket, and quickly assembled a crude but effective smoke bomb. "In position," she whispered into her earpiece. "Stand by," Lysander replied. The next 60 seconds felt like an eternity. Beatrice crouched in the supply closet, listening to her own heartbeat, and thought about Draven's hands on her face, his whispered plea for her to come back safely. She was going to make it back. She had to. "Mark," Lysander said. Beatrice activated the smoke bomb and shoved it into a trash can, then yanked the fire alarm on the wall. Immediately, sirens began wailing throughout the building, and she could hear confused shouts from the nearby offices. At the same moment, in the basement far below, Marcus's charges detonated. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in almost immediately, bathing the corridors in red, and Beatrice heard the sound of doors automatically unlocking as the building's security systems defaulted to evacuation mode. Perfect. She slipped out of the supply closet and joined the stream of confused employees heading for the stairwells, keeping her head down. Through her earpiece, she could hear the strike team's rapid communications. "Breach successful. Moving to the facility. Multiple hostiles engaging. Prisoner section located. Beginning extraction." Beatrice made it to the 3rd floor landing before someone grabbed her arm. She spun, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself face to face with Hunter Marshall. "Beatrice Porter," he said, and his smile was terrible. "I had a feeling you'd show up eventually. You always were too soft to stay away." She tried to jerk free, but his grip was iron. Around them, employees continued to rush past, too panicked by the fire alarm to notice the confrontation. "Let go of me," Beatrice said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't think so." Marshall dragged her out of the stairwell and into a nearby corridor, away from the crowds. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, girl. Stealing classified information, consorting with vampires, staging this little attack. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Beatrice said, still trying to maintain her cover. "I'm just trying to evacuate." He backhanded her across the face, hard enough to split her lip. "Don't lie to me. We've been monitoring the vampire territory since you ran. We knew they'd try something. We just didn't know when." He pulled a radio from his belt. "All units, converge on the facility. The vampires are here." Beatrice's blood ran cold. The strike team's advantage had been speed and surprise if Marshall rallied the guild's forces now, before the extraction was complete. She did the only thing she could think of. She drove her knee into Marshall's groin as hard as she could. "Hey." He grunted and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free. She ran, sprinting back toward the stairwell, but Marshall recovered faster than she'd hoped. His footsteps pounded behind her, and she knew she couldn't outrun him. "Strike team, you've been compromised," she gasped into her earpiece. "Marshall knows. He's calling reinforcements." "We're almost done," Lysander's voice came back tight with strain. 30 seconds. Can you evade? Beatrice burst through the stairwell door and started down, taking the steps 2 at a time. Marshall was right behind her, and she could hear more footsteps above other hunters, responding to his call. She wasn't going to make it. She'd just reached the second-floor landing when Marshall caught her again, slamming her against the wall hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. His hand closed around her throat, and he was smiling again. That terrible, cold smile. You should have stayed hidden, he said. Should have run far away and never looked back. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? Had to play hero. Now you get to die for it. Beatrice clawed at his hand, black spots dancing across her vision. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Lysander's voice, distant and tinny. Extraction complete. All units fall back. Beatrice, report Beatrice. She tried to respond, but she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Marshall's grip tightened, and she felt consciousness starting to slip away. Then, the stairwell door behind Marshall exploded inward, and Draven was there. He moved faster than Beatrice's human eyes could track, a blur of white and black that crashed into Marshall like a freight train. The hunter flew backward, his grip on Beatrice breaking, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping. When her vision cleared, Draven had Marshall pinned against the opposite wall, one hand around the hunter's throat and murder in his crimson eyes. "You dare!" Draven hissed, his voice vibrating with barely controlled rage. "You dare lay hands on her! Lord Draven!" Lysander's voice, sharp and urgent, came from further down the stairwell. "We need to move! Now!" Draven didn't seem to hear him. His hand tightened on Marshall's throat, and the hunter's face was turning purple. "Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right now. One reason." "Because," Beatrice gasped, forcing herself to her feet, "because killing him starts the war you're trying to prevent. Because he's not worth it. Because I need you to get me out of here safely like you promised." That broke through. Draven's eyes snapped to her, taking in her bleeding lip and bruised throat, and something in his expression cracked. He released Marshall, letting the hunter collapse to the floor, and was at Beatrice's side in an instant. "Can you walk?" he asked, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch her. "Yes. Let's go." They fled down the stairwell, Draven supporting her when she stumbled, Lysander covering their rear. Behind them, Beatrice could hear Marshall shouting into his radio, rallying the guild's forces. But the vampires moved with inhuman speed, and within minutes they'd burst out of the building into the night. A van was waiting, and Beatrice was bundled inside, along with Draven and what looked like a dozen rescued vampires, pale, injured, some barely conscious, but alive. One of them, a woman who looked young despite her white hair, had her eyes closed, but when Draven knelt beside her, they opened. "Brother?" she whispered. "Morgana," Draven breathed, and Beatrice saw tears, actual tears, slide down his face. "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe now." The van sped away from the guild headquarters, and Beatrice sagged against the wall, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. Draven reached for her hand, lacing his cool fingers through hers, and when she met his eyes, she saw relief and gratitude, and something that looked like awe. "You kept your promise," he said quietly. "You came back." "So did you," she replied. "You came for me." "Always," he said, and the word felt like a vow. The aftermath was complicated in ways Beatrice hadn't anticipated. The guild, faced with undeniable evidence of their treaty violations, the rescued vampires themselves, along with the photos Beatrice had taken, scrambled to deny involvement. They claimed Marshall had been acting without authorization, that the facility was a rogue operation, that leadership had no knowledge of the experiments. The vampire territories didn't believe a word of it, but they also recognized an opportunity. The guild's leadership was in chaos, their credibility shattered. A new treaty was negotiated, one with stronger protections and independent oversight. Marshall and his associates were turned over to a joint tribunal and sentenced to life imprisonment. The vampires agreed not to seek open war in exchange for significant concessions and reparations. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than Beatrice had dared hope for. The rescued vampires recovered slowly. Some had been imprisoned for years, subjected to experiments that had left both physical and psychological scars. Morgana was among the most severely injured, and she spent weeks in the care of the court's healers before she was strong enough to leave her bed. Through it all, Beatrice stayed in the vampire court, partly because the guild still had members who wanted her dead, and Draven's protection was the safest place for her, but mostly because she didn't want to leave. She'd found something here, in this strange underground world of ancient vampires and gothic grandeur, a sense of purpose, of belonging. And though she was almost afraid to admit it, she'd found Draven. They circled each other carefully in those weeks after the rescue, two people trying to figure out what they meant to each other. He was unfailingly courteous, ensuring she had everything she needed, checking on her recovery from Marshall's attack. But he kept that same careful distance, as if afraid to push too hard. It drove Beatrice crazy. Finally, one night nearly a month after the raid, she cornered him in his study. He looked up from the documents he was reviewing, more treaty negotiations, endless diplomatic correspondence, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Beatrice, is everything all right?" "No," she said, closing the door behind her. "It's not. We need to talk." His eyes widened slightly, and she saw him tense. "If I've done something to upset you—" "You've been avoiding me," she interrupted, "for weeks now, ever since the rescue, and I need to know why." Draven set down his pen very carefully, his expression guarded. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've simply been busy with the treaty negotiations." "Bullshit," Beatrice said bluntly. "I've watched you navigate a dozen political crises in the last month. You're the most efficient person I've ever met. If you wanted to spend time with me, you'd find the time. So either you don't want to, or you're deliberately keeping your distance for some other reason. Which is it?" For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he rose and moved to the window. Not that there was anything to see, they were underground, but the posture was telling anyway. His back was to her, his shoulders rigid. "You're mortal," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Human. You have a lifespan I can measure in decades, not centuries. And I'm a vampire, Beatrice. I've lived for 200 years, and I'll live for hundreds more. Anything between us would be temporary by definition." "So, you're protecting me from heartbreak?" Beatrice said, trying to keep the anger out of her voice. "Deciding for me what I can and can't handle?" "No." He turned to face her, and the pain in his expression was stark. "I'm protecting myself. Because I've already lost everyone I've loved to mortality, my parents, my friends from when I was human, lovers who aged and died while I stayed frozen in time. I can't do it again, Beatrice. I can't let myself care for you the way I want to, and then watch you fade away over the next 50 or 60 years. It would destroy me." Beatrice crossed the room slowly, coming to stand in front of him. "Draven," she said gently, "you already care about me. That ship has sailed. The only question is whether you're going to let yourself be happy for whatever time we have, or waste it being afraid." "I could turn you," he said abruptly. "Make you vampire, then we'd have centuries together." "Is that what you want?" she asked. He stopped, his jaw working. "I don't know. The transformation is irreversible, and it's not always successful. You'd have to die first, truly die, and then be reborn. You'd lose the sunlight, have to feed on blood, watch everyone you know age and die. I can't ask that of you." "Then don't ask," Beatrice said. "Let me choose. But not right now. This is too important a decision to make in the heat of the moment. For now, let's try this. See where it goes. Figure out what we want together, instead of you making assumptions about what I can handle." "And if I hurt you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "If this ends badly?" "Then it ends badly," Beatrice said. "But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have had something real, instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering what if." Draven stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out in his expression, fear versus desire, logic versus emotion. Finally, slowly, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands, just like he had the night before the raid. "You're absolutely certain?" he asked. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. His lips were cool but soft, and he kissed her with a gentleness that made her ache. There was restraint in it, control, as if he was afraid of his own strength, but there was also passion, desire, a need that matched her own. Beatrice wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring 4 weeks of frustration and longing into it. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice was breathing hard. Draven was just going through the motions. She found herself smiling. "See," she said, "that wasn't so hard." He laughed, the sound startled out of him, and rested his forehead against hers. "You're going to be the death of me, Beatrice Porter." "Probably," she agreed, "but you'll enjoy every minute of it." They took things slowly after that, learning each other in the quiet moments between diplomatic crises and court business. Draven showed her the parts of the underground complex she'd never seen, libraries filled with books in a dozen languages, art galleries housing works by masters long dead, even a garden of sorts, lit by artificial light and filled with night-blooming flowers. In return, Beatrice told him about her life before the Guild, her childhood in a small town upstate, her dreams of becoming a historian. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, and Beatrice fell a little more in love with him each day. Morgana recovered slowly, and when she was finally well enough to hold a conversation, she sought Beatrice out in her room. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice still weak but growing stronger. "Draven told me what you did, how you risked everything to bring him that information. I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Beatrice said gently. "I'm just glad we got you out in time." Morgana smiled, and in it, Beatrice could see the family resemblance to Draven, the same sharp features, the same intensity. "My brother cares for you very much, you know. I haven't seen him this happy in decades." "I care for him too," Beatrice admitted. "Good." Morgana's expression grew more serious. "He deserves happiness. He spent so long taking care of everyone else, sacrificing his own needs for the good of the territories. It's time someone took care of him for a change." It was a blessing, Beatrice realized. Morgana was giving her approval, welcoming her into the family. The thought made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I'll do my best," she promised. 6 months after the raid, the new treaty was finalized. It included provisions for mixed tribunals to investigate future disputes, established clear rules for vampire-human interactions, and created a path for humans who worked closely with vampires to receive formal protections. The Guild was restructured, its leadership replaced by people who actually believed in coexistence. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Beatrice had become something of a liaison between the human and vampire worlds, using her knowledge of both to help smooth over conflicts and misunderstandings. It was work she found fulfilling, even if it occasionally put her in danger. Draven hated the danger part, but he'd learned to trust her judgment most of the time. They'd been together for almost a year when the subject of transformation came up again. They were in Draven's private chambers. Beatrice had moved in months ago, though she still maintained her own suite for appearances, and she was curled against his side on the enormous bed, his cool fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "Dangerous pastime," he murmured, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I want to be turned," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've thought about it, really thought about it, and I want to spend centuries with you, not just decades. I want to be part of this world fully. I want forever, Draven." He'd gone very still beside her. "Beatrice." "I know it's dangerous," she interrupted. "I know I'll have to die and that the transformation might not work. I know I'll lose the sun and my human life and so many things, but I'll gain more than I lose. I'll gain you, and time, and the ability to keep doing this work I love, and I've never been more sure of anything." Draven sat up slowly, his crimson eyes searching her face. "If we do this," he said carefully, "there's no going back. You can't change your mind afterward, can't decide in a decade that you miss being human. You need to be absolutely certain." "I am certain," Beatrice said firmly. "I've had a year to think about it, to understand what I'd be giving up and what I'd be gaining. This is what I want. You're what I want." Something shifted in his expression, wonder and love and a joy so profound, it took her breath away. "Then I'll transform you," he said softly. "But we do this right. There are rituals, preparations. You'll need to feed from me first to begin building up your tolerance to vampire blood. And when the time comes for the actual transformation, it should be somewhere safe, with healers present in case something goes wrong. How long? Beatrice asked. A month, perhaps. Maybe 2. It depends on how quickly your body adapts. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. I love you, Beatrice. I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid of what it might mean. I'm not afraid anymore. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I think I have since that first night when you hid me behind your throne and risked everything to keep me safe. The preparations took exactly 6 weeks. Beatrice fed from Draven nightly, tiny amounts at first, building up her body's tolerance to the supernatural properties of vampire blood. It was strange and intimate, the act of drinking from him, and it created a bond between them that she could feel growing stronger each day. When the night of the transformation finally arrived, Beatrice was ready. They'd chosen one of the deeper chambers, warded with protective spells and attended by the court's most skilled healers. Morgana was there, and Lysander, and several other vampires Beatrice had come to consider friends. Draven led her to the center of the chamber, his hand steady in hers. Last chance, he said quietly. If you have any doubts... No doubts, Beatrice said firmly. I'm ready. He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and when he pulled back, his eyes were glowing with that internal crimson fire. Then let's begin. The transformation was agony in ways Beatrice hadn't imagined. Draven bit deep into her throat, drinking until she could feel her heartbeat slowing, her vision dimming. She died with his name on her lips, the world fading to black. And then she woke. It felt like rising through deep water, breaking through the surface into a world that was sharper, clearer, more vivid than anything she'd known. Every sense was heightened. She could hear the heartbeats of the healers across the room, smell the distinct scents of different vampires, see details in the shadows that had been invisible before. And she was hungry. God, she was so hungry. Draven was there immediately, his wrist already bleeding, and she fed without thought, the taste of his blood rich and perfect and exactly what she needed. When she finally pulled away, the hunger had settled into something manageable, and she could think clearly again. Welcome back, Draven said softly, and there were tears on his face, blood tears, crimson tracks down his white cheeks. How do you feel? Alive, Beatrice said, and then laughed at the irony. More alive than ever, actually. Is it always like this? The intensity fades over time, Lysander said from nearby, smiling. But yes, the world is richer when you're vampire. You'll learn to control the hunger, to manage the heightened senses, and you have centuries to practice. Beatrice looked at her hands, noting the way her skin had paled, taking on that same white luminescence as the other vampires. When she caught her reflection in a nearby mirror, she gasped. White hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her eyes glowed crimson. She was beautiful, inhuman and strange, and absolutely beautiful. What do you think? Draven asked, watching her with an expression of mingled hope and fear. I think, Beatrice said slowly, that I've never been happier. I think that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. She turned to him, taking his hands in hers. I think that we have forever now, and I can't wait to spend every moment of it with you. He kissed her again, and this time there was no restraint, no fear of hurting her with his strength. They were equals now, matched in power and immortality, and the kiss was fierce and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, the assembled vampires were applauding, and Morgana was beaming through her own blood tears. Welcome to the family, she said, pulling Beatrice into a hug. Officially, this time. The celebration lasted through the night and into the next. Beatrice learned that vampire revelries were elaborate affairs, full of ancient customs and traditions she'd never encountered. She met vampires from other territories, all curious about the human who'd sacrificed her mortality for love and who'd helped broker the new treaty. She was introduced as Beatrice, Lady of the Northern Territories, consort to the Vampire King. It felt surreal and perfect and absolutely right. As dawn approached, she could feel it now, an instinctive awareness of the sun's position, even underground. The celebration wound down. Draven led her back to their chambers, his arm around her waist. You'll need to sleep soon, he said. The sun is rising and your body will demand rest. It's not like human sleep, it's deeper, more complete. But you'll be safe here. Will you stay with me? Beatrice asked. Always, he promised. Every dawn, every dusk, for as long as you want me. Forever then, she said, pulling him close. I want you forever. They fell asleep as the sun crested the horizon above them, two immortals wrapped in each other's arms, and Beatrice's last thought before the darkness claimed her was that she'd finally found home. Years passed, then decades. Beatrice grew into her power, learned to navigate vampire politics and the complexities of immortal life. She and Draven became legendary in their own right, the vampire king and his human-turned-vampire consort, who'd risked everything for each other and reshaped the world in the process. The treaty held, strengthened by their example and the relationships they had built between humans and vampires. There were still conflicts, still moments of tension, but nothing like the old days of open war. The world had changed, become something better. Morgana thrived, recovering fully from her ordeal and becoming one of Draven's most trusted advisors. She eventually fell in love with a human scholar who chose transformation to be with her, and Beatrice stood beside her at the bonding ceremony, grateful to see her sister-in-law find the same happiness she'd found. On their 50th anniversary, 50 years since that midnight when a desperate human had begged shelter from hunters and a vampire king had hidden her behind his throne, Draven took Beatrice to the surface. They stood on a rooftop in the city, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Do you ever regret it? Draven asked quietly. Giving up your humanity, your mortal life? Beatrice considered the question seriously, as she always did. Sometimes I miss the sun, she admitted. I miss the warmth of it, the way it felt on my skin. And I miss my family, the human family I had to leave behind. But regret? She turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. Never. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over because it brought me here. To you. To this life we've built together. He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and Beatrice felt the same surge of love and joy she'd felt that first night when he'd chosen to protect a stranger at great cost to himself. They'd come so far since then, built a life and a love that had reshaped their world. And they had centuries more ahead of them, centuries of sunsets and midnights, of challenges and triumphs, of the quiet moments that made immortality worth living. Forever had turned out to be exactly long enough. They returned to the underground court hand in hand, greeted by friends and family in the life they'd created together. And as Draven pulled her into a dance in the grand ballroom, surrounded by vampires celebrating their anniversary, Beatrice thought about that terrified girl who'd stumbled into the throne room so long ago. She'd been looking for shelter, for safety from those who wanted her dead. And she'd found that, yes, but she'd also found purpose and family and a love that transcended the boundaries between human and vampire, mortal and immortal. She'd found everything she'd never known she was searching for. Draven spun her across the floor, his crimson eyes glowing with love and joy, and Beatrice laughed with pure happiness. This was her life now, immortal, impossible, perfect in its imperfection, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it. The music swelled around them, and Beatrice leaned into Draven's embrace, letting the moment wash over her. 50 years together, with countless more ahead. It was a gift beyond measure, and she planned to treasure every single moment. As the dance ended, and the celebration continued around them, Draven pulled her close and whispered against her ear. Thank you. For what? Beatrice asked. For being brave enough to ask for shelter, he said softly. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For changing my world, my entire existence for the better. For loving me despite everything that should have kept us apart. For choosing forever with me. Beatrice's eyes filled with blood tears, crimson tracks that Draven tenderly wiped away. Thank you for hiding me behind your throne, she whispered back. For protecting me. For seeing me as more than just a frightened human, for giving me a reason to believe in something better, for making forever something I actually wanted. They stood there in the center of the ballroom, holding each other as the celebration swirled around them, two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of violence and fear. The night stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and beyond that, Centuries more, an endless string of midnights and dawns, challenges and triumphs, quiet moments and grand adventures. But for now, in this moment, there was just the two of them and the love they'd fought so hard to protect. And that was more than enough. That was everything.